If you're anything like me, you probably know a smug, despotic, know it all control freak who has time and time again smacked these dreaded words in your face.
I told you so, 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 I told you.
This excuse of a human is somehow always convinced about his stance on everything. Any attempt to debate with him shall swiftly be met with a statistic, a quote, a citation, or worse.
Oh, please. If I don't know, you don't know. That's axiomatic.
These tyrants happen to exist everywhere. It could be your dear friend who won't stop blabbering about how communism was never carried out correctly, your coworker who drones on and on about how the V60 is the only way to brew the best cup of coffee, your gym trainer shoving the dogma of intermittent fasting down your throat, your milkman who's convinced himself we are living in a simulation, or it could very well be your own bloody grandma trying every possible tactic to get you to embrace Jesus in your life. These ideological hooligans are staunch believers in their worldview and attempt to sway you into their way of thinking. They love molding the world down to their convictions to neatly bucket everything as black and white. Ideology. It starts as a spark, an idea that makes you feel like you've finally got something figured out. But over time, that spark festers into something much larger. It stops being just an idea and becomes a foundation to being a staunch, inflexible, ideological overlord. And soon, this foundation morphs into a fortress built not to protect the idea itself, but to shield the holder from anything that might threaten it. Today, let's talk about this fortress, how it gets built, how it limits our view, and maybe, just maybe, how we can learn to let down the walls, brick by brick, without having the whole friggin' fortress collapse on ourselves. Take a second and rewind to the time you were born. You were born into a family that held a set of ideologies that were passed down to them in a single unbroken chain, an unending series of transfers across millions of years of evolution. These ideologies helped them survive the onslaught of nature, carried them through extended periods of political turmoil, wars, famines, and all the other trials and tribulations of humanity. Over the course of time, these ideologies solidified as beliefs. Beliefs that, simply put, act as a guide for how the world works. And these beliefs aren't built in isolation, they're the product of 1,000 influences: family, society, history, and all the quiet biases left unaddressed, lurking within the shadows of our psyche that shape us, like the roots of a tree drawing strength from its soil. Part of that soil is given to us, and a part of it we choose. Yet, at some point, these roots stop growing freely and start becoming more like handcuffs. But the worst part is, you don't even know you're being cuffed tightly to one singular understanding of how everything operates. You start to take on labels, stances, affiliations, sometimes so deeply that you don't see where the belief ends and where your identity begins. We are hardwired right from the moment we are born with certain tendencies, personality traits, even preferences that make us more likely to lean one way or another. There are countless nature versus nurture studies that highlight this. Take this famous study of twins, for instance. Researchers looked at identical twins raised apart and found striking similarities in their political views, often more similar than those of fraternal twins raised together. The genetic overlap in identical twins means that certain predispositions, like a tendency to seek novelty or alternatively a desire for stability, are passed down and can shape political orientation. The study suggests around 30 to 60% of our political leanings may be heritable, largely through personality traits that incline you towards particular beliefs. While on the other hand, there's nurture, the influences you are exposed to right from childhood: family values, local culture, the era we are born into, the 7,256 reels you consumed this morning while doom scrolling on the toilet seat for 45 minutes. All of these impact your ideologies profoundly in ways you don't realize. What's curious is how nature and nurture interact, not in isolation but together. Heritability only matters up to a certain point, providing the building blocks for your ideologies. Beyond this, your ideologies are either fed or starved by the influences surrounding you. Our genes might push us towards certain inclinations, but our surroundings help decide the direction of that push. But if you are pushed too far, you end up falling off the cliff of critical thinking and end up in the abyss, along with thousands of other ideological zombies who have met the same dreaded fate as you. So, the next time you attend the call of nature, instead of doom scrolling, might I suggest indulging in mulling over a bit of existential dilemma? After all, what better place to contemplate your life than your very own porcelain throne? Maybe it's worth looking at some of your beliefs and asking yourself, where did this belief come from? Is it truly mine? Or am I just mindlessly regurgitating a piece of meaningless drivel that's been passed down to me, that I've based most of my life decisions on, and I'm completely oblivious to the inner workings of it? Comforting, isn't it? Nothing like a dose of contemplating the very fabric of your beliefs to get those bowel movements going, eh? Somewhere in ancient Greece, a doddery old dude named Aristotle regarded mimesis or imitation to be one of the distinctive aspects of human nature. The instinct of imitation is implanted in man from childhood. One difference between him and other animals being that he is the most imitative of living creatures, and through imitation learns his earliest lessons. And no less universal is the pleasure felt in things imitated. Mimesis. Humans are an extremely fickle species. If a socially credible external entity is providing you a doctrine of what's acceptable to think and what isn't, chances are you'll run with it and base your entire life's decision making on it. Why, you ask? Because you're not the only one. Humans rely on mimesis to bind together large groups that think and act alike. It's when we start to mimic the people around us, often unconsciously, we may discover it's a way to feel safe, understood. In politics, religion, social circles, this imitation game happens everywhere. We start speaking the same words, adopting the same gestures, wearing the same ideological armor. We lose nuance for the sake of solidarity and clarity for the sake of certainty. And before we know, we end up becoming a brainless ideological muppet with a ventriloquist's hand up our arse, telling us what to think and speak. What started as belonging becomes something much tighter, something heavier. The bonds turn into shackles, confining our ability to discern outside of a narrow, predefined set of values, virtues, and agendas that once introduced us to the safety of our tribe. Groupthink kicks in, and we start thinking in terms of us versus them. Anyone who doesn't act like us meets our worst Gretchen impression from Mean Girls. We start agreeing with wholesale bundles of ideas, so long as it guarantees us safety within a certain group of people who think the same. After all, we found strength in numbers, but there is weakness in the foundations of our critical thinking, waiting to be exposed until we find ourselves in a situation that stands in stark contradiction with the consensus of our tribe. Mimesis finds us an ideological home, but takes away its pillars. An ideology keeps a group safe from intruders who might bring with them an infectious strain of thought. The French philosopher René Girard once defined ideology as the idea that everything is either good or bad. It's truly a sign of maturity to be able to hold on to two conflicting desires or two opposing ideas at the same time without immediately rejecting one or the other before there has been time for a careful discernment. Sometimes the most profound truths come wrapped in paradoxes. There's a Latin phrase, coincidentia oppositorum, or coincidence of opposites. It's the idea that contradictions don't always clash. Sometimes they coexist. And in doing so, they challenge everything we know, or everything we think we know about the world. Think about it. A person who's both meek and bold, someone who's deeply humble yet radiates quiet confidence, or experiences that utterly confound expectations, things that make you stop and say, wait, those things can't coexist. These contradictions, they're more than just quirks of reality. They're signs. They're pointing to something beyond our usual way of thinking. We all navigate life using mental maps, maps of meaning, maps of how the world is supposed to work. But when opposites collide, when meekness and boldness walk hand in hand, or humility and confidence coexist, they don't fit on the map. They challenge the boundaries of what we think is possible. So when you encounter these paradoxes, when someone or something defies your expectations, don't dismiss it. Lean into it. Let it challenge you. Because sometimes the things that don't make sense are the ones that lead us to a deeper understanding of the world and of ourselves. This is Cletus McNeanderthal. 2 million years ago, we looked just like him. Old Cletus here had to survive a nut freezing ice age and hunt mammoths with his homies so that he could feed Cletus Jr. and then crack open a cold one with the boys. We've come a long way since the days of Cletus and his homies. We press a few buttons on a glowy rectangle, and a venti pumpkin spice latte with 8 shots of espresso, 7 pumps of pumpkin sauce, and 1 pump of maple pecan sauce shows up at our doorstep. We discovered how to conquer the world and label ourselves as a spreadsheet sorcerer on LinkedIn. We built apps that count our steps, toasters with Wi Fi, chairs that hug us back, fridges that judge our eating habits, headphones that cancel not just noise but our entire social lives, and also toothbrushes that text us passive aggressive reminders to floss. And we've finally figured out how to get a robot dog to dance to Lizzo. So while we've taken over the world with our NFT collections and Fortnite dances, we still end up resorting to our tribalistic tendencies. Because really, evolution gave us Wi Fi, but it forgot to update our software. So now, these tribalistic tendencies that are hardwired in our DNA creep into politics and religion. Tribalism, of the ideological kind, stems from having rigid ideas that act as a compass but not a map. The compass gives you a general sense of direction, but without the nuance of a map, you're bound to get lost in the wilderness of the ideological terrain. It's not just about choosing sides, it's about letting those sides define you. It's about firmly believing that your way of life is the only acceptable way. Anyone who thinks differently becomes a project for you. You begin chipping away at their patience and sense of identity, one self righteous monologue at a time, until they finally give in just to get you to shut your annoying, sanctimonious spy hole. You're lulled into thinking you're salvaging someone from a path of total eternal damnation by introducing them to the virtue of your ways. It's easy, comforting even to stay in a bubble where everything is reaffirmed and anything outside is painted as the enemy. You leave no room for questions. Your world is painted in absolutes, with your ideology as the final answer to every question you might otherwise explore. But what if your ideology isn't a fortress, but rather a journey? And what if questioning our faith doesn't threaten it, but deepens it further? We live in a time where the most valuable form of currency is the number of views you get on your TikTok dance. Today, your identity has become your biggest asset. Your identity gives you a soapbox to present the world with your stance on everything. You must take on certain labels to fit in with a certain audience. Race, gender, orientation, politics. Each of these nuanced hot button issues becomes a nifty little box you're supposed to fit into, a label you're meant to wear. But what happens when you let these labels become the only definition of who you are? Identity politics tells us who we are based on our groups. But identity built solely on labels fragments us. We forget to look inward and start looking only to the outside world, seeking validation from those who share our labels and criticism from those who don't. At some point, it's not about being true to ourselves. It's about being true to a narrative we've built around who we think we're supposed to be. Our beliefs have been bastardized to the point of them being like little performative jigs. This was a lot less concerning when you pretended to like Justin Bieber to impress your high school crush. Now you're pretending to be an expert at complex geopolitical issues to gain acceptance among people you've never met. And the worst part is, you probably don't know how many of your stances are truly, unapologetically yours, rather than being an ideological costume that you don to perform a mating dance with the belle of the ball. Virtue signaling is how you show loyalty to your tribe, to show them that you belong to the right side. But when you broadcast beliefs without truly embodying them, they just become hollow. Real conviction doesn't need an audience. It's quiet, steady, woven into the fabric of who you are, not just what you say. Genuine conviction isn't broadcasted, it's lived, embodied, internalized. It's a fabric of your being that guides you from within. You don't need your personal cheering squad and the fanfare for believing in what you truly do. Because when you're authentic about your beliefs without getting swayed by the ever changing winds of what's trendy to care about, you attract your tribe naturally without needing to masquerade as a sourdough baking, kombucha guzzling, chakra aligning, sapiosexual digital nomad. There's a notion floating among tech bros across Silicon Valley after a quote sometimes attributed to Jeff Bezos went viral: strong opinions, loosely held. On the surface, this can be interpreted in a rather constructive way, right? One can hold their conviction strongly until presented with information that can get them to challenge their own beliefs and trend their loosely held strong opinion without ego. Without ego. Only an utter fool would use an Android phone. We should absolutely paint the living room in drunk tank pink. Everyone and their grandma is dying for a sequel to Daddy Day Camp. Big Joe's Pizza is the most disgusting place on earth, and I'd rather lick a New York subway pole than eat a single slice from there ever again. Here's the thing about strong opinions loosely held. It's a license to make bold, dramatic claims, like really dramatic. The kind of claims that make people's eyebrows shoot up, and yet you're not supposed to cling to them for dear life. The idea is that you can shout pineapple belongs on pizza and it's a peak of culinary innovation with all the confidence in the world, and still calmly say, "Oh, my bad," 5 minutes later when someone hands you a slice and it tastes like regret. What really happens after someone makes a bombastic statement like this is that any further scope of discussion gets shut down. In theory, it's supposed to create this perfect arena for ideas, a space where everyone's duking it out, but there's no ego involved. Your ideas don't just get debated, it gets the intellectual equivalent of a gladiator showdown. And the best ideas? They're supposed to walk away victorious, while everyone shakes hands and walks off into the sunset. No hard feelings. Ideological certainty feels great until it doesn't. When you declare something with 100% conviction, you're setting yourself up for the classic faceplant moment when reality decides to prove you wrong. But fortunately, there's a simple fix for this. And I mean ridiculously simple. Like, why doesn't everyone already do this? All you have to do is leave yourself a little wiggle room. Add a dash of uncertainty. Instead of shouting, "This is definitely the way forward," try saying, "I'm 80% sure this is the best option." And what does that do? Two things. First, it keeps your brain flexible. You're not chaining yourself to an opinion. You're saying, "This is where I am at right now, but I'm open to being convinced otherwise." And second, it makes you sound way more approachable. You're not the person demanding everyone agree with you. You're the person inviting discussion. And what's even better, this habit is contagious. You can model it for your teen. Say, I'm 70% confident this idea is solid, but sure, let's stress test it. Or, I'm 50-50 on whether this is the right choice. What do you think? People will soon start copying you, and suddenly you've got a culture where it's okay to rethink things. And the best part? Changing your mind doesn't feel like admitting defeat anymore. You just say, now that I've heard your point, I'm moving my confidence down by 20%. It's like recalibrating instead of crash landing. As Annie Duke says in Thinking in Bets, starting at 90% certainty gives your ego much more room to adapt and adjust than locking yourself into absolute unwavering confidence. So, the only bold statement that I will leave you with today is that everyone certainly hates that smug, despotic, know it all control freak who says,
I told you so, 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 I told you.
because sometimes the smartest move is in saying, I'm not totally sure yet.